Okay, colleagues, Toby's just decided to move away from his seat. Helen, Toby, I don't know if you want to turn off and put your screens on when you're speaking during the meeting, but I'll make a start now. Are we recording the meeting?
Yes, we're live now, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this virtual meeting of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly Leadership Board. Before considering today's business, I'll outline the protocols for the meeting. Today's meeting has been live streamed to the public via Microsoft Teams and is also being recorded. When board members are speaking, they may choose to use their video. If the council's live stream fails during the meeting and we cannot share the proceedings, I'll adjourn the meeting so that access can be restored. If the issue cannot be resolved, I'll halt the meeting and remaining business will be concluded at a future date. If a board member experiences a technical issue, I'll adjourn for a short period to try and re-establish their connection. As I call board members to speak, I'll remind you to switch on your microphone. If for some reason you cannot be heard, the democratic officer will advise you. Votes will be taken using the raise your hand function and the result announced by the Democratic Services Officer. Where a board member has declared a non-registrable interest, a disclosable pecuniary interest, or an interest by virtue of any trade union membership in a matter, they must leave the virtual meeting. Their departure will be confirmed and they'll be invited to rejoin the meeting at the appropriate time. To confirm, the procedure for today's meeting is that board members who wish to speak on an item should indicate by using the raise your hand function. Others in attendance not on the committee or unable to use the hand do not we don't have members speaking during this meeting, so it's just the board members. Before we start today's business, I'll ask the Democratic Services Officer to confirm that all Cabinet members are present. So, Jerry, Democratic Services Officer, please.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So what I'm going to do before we start today's business, I'll call each name of the board members and I'd like you to confirm your name and the organisation you represent or your electoral division. So starting with the Chairman, Councillor Julian German.
Julian German, Roseland Electoral Division, Leader of Cornwall Council and Chair of the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Leadership Board.
Councillor Adam Painter.
Thank you and good afternoon. Adam Painter, Cornwall Councillor for Launceston North and North Pedderwin and Deputy Leader. Thank you.
Councillor Robert Francis. Councillor Francis, have you got your audio on? Okay, I'll move on to Councillor Fran Grotty. Oh, okay.
Good afternoon. It's Robert Francis, Chairman of the Council of the Isles of Scilly. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Councillor Fran Grotty.
Good afternoon. Vice Chair of the Council of the Isles of Scilly and representative from St Mary's.
Steve Double MP.
Good afternoon, Steve Double, Member of Parliament for St Austell and Newquay, and sitting on this board on behalf of the 6 of Cornwall's MPs.
Thank you. Alison Hernandez.
Hello, Alison Hernandez, Police and Crime Commissioner for Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly.
Toby Parkins.
Toby Parkins, President of Cornwall Chamber of Commerce.
Helen Price.
Helen Price, Chair of CALC here in Cornwall.
Okay, CALC being Cornwall Association of Local Councils.
Sorry, yes.
That's fine, thank you. Just for the public. Councillor Linda Taylor.
Good afternoon. Councillor Linda Taylor, representing Carbis Bainley Land and the Conservative Group Leader.
Thank you. Kevin Gaston.
Hello everybody, Kevin Gaston, co-chair of Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Local Nature Partnership. Thank you.
Chris Blom.
Hello, Chris Blom, lay member, vice chair of NHS Kerno Clinical Commissioning Group.
Councillor Rob Rochell.
Hi, Rob Rochell, representing Camelford, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care for Cornwall Council.
And finally, Mark Dudridge.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mark Dudridge, chair of the Local Enterprise Partnership.
Thank you very much, board members. Are there any that I may have missed? Okay, Chairman, thank you. I would like now, Chairman, if I may, just to do a roll call of those officers that are present. We have Kate Canali, Chief Executive of Cornwall Council. We have invited guest Malcolm Bell, who's the Chief Executive of Visit Cornwall. We have David Crone, Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Growth Programme Manager, and Tom Walton, Senior Officer, Democratic and Corporate from the Council of the Isles of Scilly. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And are there any apologies for absence, please?
I've received none, Chairman.
Thank you. And declarations of interest? Are there any declarations of interest from board members? No, giving you a pause just to make sure. Okay, thank you. Then we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the notes of the meeting of the 6th of March. I don't have any items from those minutes requiring an update. Is there anyone else who'd like to come in? Chris Blom, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just on the part that I commented upon, just looking, it's page 4 of the minutes, but page 6 of the bundle. I just want to perhaps suggest a different form of words there where it talks about the relevant website. I'd just like to change the emergencies be directed to NHS 111 to something along the lines of more serious concerns should be directed to NHS 111 and for emergencies dial 999. We don't tend to use 111 for emergency calls. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll bring in Councillor Rochell in case it's on the same theme. And before we talk about that one, Councillor Rochell.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. It's on the, it's not on the same subject, it's on the bottom of page 5, where I talked about the appointment of a joint chief officer between the CCG and Cornwall Council, and confirmed that the successful candidate was Helen Charlesworth May and has taken up the position.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Board members, were you happy to amend the minutes and receive that update?
Could we, Chairman, could we have a formal mover and seconder, please, by raising a hand?
Certainly. I was going to just make sure that no one had any objections to what was being said, but I think the people that have raised their hands have now done so to propose and second. So Chris Blom and Rob Rochell to propose and second. Thank you. If you could raise your hand if you are for the proposal, and then the Democratic Service Officer will count those votes. Thank you.
Okay, Chairman, that's been carried.
Thank you. Do we not need to ensure that there's any votes against or abstentions if it's not unanimous?
As it's carried, we would ask if there are any abstentions, please.
Thank you. Oh, I haven't put my hand down yet. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And so the next item is the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Leadership Board's response to coronavirus and approach to recovery and renewal. It feels very poignant that the notes of our last formal meeting on the 6th of March recorded the first confirmed case of coronavirus in Cornwall. The weeks that have followed since have seen a further 590 cases and tragically the deaths of 203 members of our Cornish community. I know that I echo the feelings of everyone in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly in sending sincere condolences to all of those who have lost loved ones. The events since March have been without parallel during our lifetime. In addition to the terrible human cost, the impact on our local economy has been devastating. Cornwall's unemployment claimant rate has more than doubled between March and April 2020, whilst the Isles of Scilly saw the largest rate rise of all 379 local authorities. National data shows that 7 of the 10 towns with the largest increases in unemployment are in Cornwall. Consumer spending has been slashed, and the Penzance area, for example, saw an 89% reduction in non-grocery spending compared to the same period last year. Bank spending data shows Penzance, Falmouth and Weybridge are amongst the 20 worst affected towns in England and Wales. April saw a 401% increase in applications for free school meals compared against the same month last year, whilst council tax support increased by 142% over the same period. These very stark statistics underline the devastating impact being felt by communities and households across our area. I'm sorry, I'm having a technical moment. Apologies. Apologies, colleagues. This is part of the joy of trying to work virtually and keeping computer screens going. So I was talking about those stark statistics and the challenges that all of our residents are facing. There have, however, been positives which are important not to lose sight of. The response of our communities has been outstanding, with individuals, volunteers, community groups and local organisations working tirelessly to help those in need of support. Nearly 2/3 of Cornwall's voluntary sector organisations have developed new services to support needs identified during the crisis. My sincere thanks to all of those who have played a vital role in supporting our communities and supporting other sectors. The crisis has encouraged us to embrace new ways of working and communicating. Our increased use of technology has allowed us to work in ways which have significantly reduced their impact upon the environment, with a reduced need for travel and printing, practices which will form an important part in contributing to our climate change action plan. It has also brought into clear focus the strength of partnership working in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. Cornwall Council's Cabinet meeting on Wednesday reflected on the extensive arrangements put in place to join up work with partners through 13 cells covering key areas of activity, including housing and homelessness, PPE and community support. and I'd like to pay tribute to the work and commitment of these cells, and I encourage people to read the detail of what has been achieved in the Cabinet paper, which forms part of the background papers to our agenda today. The crisis has also underlined the value of this partnership. Leadership board members have been in touch regularly throughout this period to build a shared understanding of how the situation has been impacting our various sectors and to work together to address areas of concern. The board was established to provide a strengthened and consolidated voice for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and we have worked with Cornwall's MPs to ensure that our voice has been heard by government, calling for access to the level of personal protective equipment needed by our services, calling for action to address the gaps in financial support for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly businesses, and seeking relaxation of rules to enable European funds to be repurposed to support the rebuilding of our economy. Every board member has played a key role, and their support has vividly demonstrated that our organisations are so much stronger together. To board members, thank you for the commitment that you have given to working together throughout this time, and indeed across all of our organisations. At this point, I'd like to hand over to colleagues to say some more about the issues that their sectors have faced and how organisations have been responding. So we're going to go to health, public health and social care first. So Councillor Rothschild, if you'd like to come in here, thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I don't recall a period of time in my whole career that's been as challenging as that which we've experienced over the last 3 months. At Cabinet, earlier in the week, I did a long piece about the work that social care and health have been engaged in over the last 3 months, but today I'm just going to focus on the work of the adult social care team. Excuse me. Prior to COVID-19, we led the design of the Embrace programme, which looked at the out-of-hospital pathway, and we had already progressed design work to change the model of care in Cornwall prior to COVID-19. This meant we were able to take bold decisions to accelerate some of our planned changes in preparation for the COVID-19 8th of April peak. So the work we've done with supporting care providers and care delivery, an immediate priority was to work with domiciliary care providers to maintain care during a period of sustained staff absence, and by working with providers to position them as trusted assessors, we were able to protect the continuity of care throughout the COVID-19 period. A morning meeting each day with the provider market took place, which was followed at the end of the day with a summary from the Joint Director Health and Care, sharing advice and guidance. This process helped to co-design the local support and provided a link to the activities of the cells and emergency team meetings, both local and regional, from the front line of care delivery. This process has received endorsement as best practice, and the communications now reach across the independent providers sector, voluntary care services and primary care. Over the last 3 months, we've supported providers in sourcing and appropriately utilising PPE and met some of the additional costs incurred by providers. In addition, working with Cornwall Partnership Foundation Trust, we're able to utilise the NHS supply chain in support of independent providers. Throughout these efforts, Cornwall was able to maintain a sufficient PPE delivery to deliver care across the changing landscape and increasing need and changes in guidance. We co-developed a local provider support scheme, providing an additional payment for each council or NHS funded hour of domiciliary care commissioned and for each residential care placement in place to support the sector. We worked with CoreServe on the Proud to Care recruitment campaign, which established a bank of additional care staff to provide personal care, either in people's homes or as a replacement or addition to existing staff working in residential care homes. Over 100 additional staff were recruited and trained to directly support providers and additional services throughout the pandemic. Again, through CoreServe, we reached across to hotel businesses at risk through the restrictions and established 125 additional discharge to assess beds in 3 separate hotels. This action allowed the system to free up sufficient ventilated beds to safely manage the pandemic and protect people's lives. Additionally, we supported the establishment of a care home support cell and team, which pulled in representation from key providers and is led by a local GP. This allowed us to deploy vital infection control services across Cornwall when care homes experienced outbreaks and to support their staff and businesses through recovery. And more recently, we acted as the local delivery agent for several central government in distributing the infection control funding to care homes, and there's further work underway to distribute the same funding to home care providers and provide assurance statements in respect of care homes. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Rothschild. Chris Blong, would you like to come in next, please?
Thank you, Julian, and thank you for the opportunity to briefly outline what the key areas of challenge and responses made by our health and care services have been since we last met on the 6th of March. The NHS has been at national level 4 incident response since the start of COVID-19, which migrated from initial to ongoing partway through, and this allowed us to start the resumption of certain non-COVID related non-critical services or critical services. I've just been notified that actually the government is stepping down the incident response level to level 3. Literally an email has just winged its way in. So I think that'll be news that we'll all be interested in. There is concern that measures agreed nationally to ease restrictions are having a negative effect, an impact on people's compliance with social distancing, including hand hygiene and the like. The acceleration of which may lead to future increases in the rate of infection, as we would expect. 1 or more peaks of reinfection are expected in 3 of the 4 existing COVID-19 modelling scenarios we currently use. The timing of any subsequent wave is likely to depend upon population compliance with social distancing measures or not. Nationally and locally, there is a growing backlog of treatment, with waiting lists for outpatients and operations increasing, which may lead to harm, which we are seeking to avoid wherever possible. The continued availability of PPE in sufficient and sustainable quantities remains a key concern and a risk to the future expansion of services. Increasing the numbers of antibody tests is also being limited by the availability of phlebotomy services within the community. Both are significant in improving our collective response to COVID and for a safer recovery. Scenario test modelling continues to predict localised future COVID-19 demand for health and care services, using a range of assumptions for population immunity, visitor numbers to Cornwall, and likely infection rates. Health and care services are now developing plans to mitigate known and emerging future risks, identifying and securing sufficient capacity that will manage likely surges in demand for our services. Our planned recovery and ongoing responses need to retain a degree of flexibility as the future remains uncertain for what will be revised ways of working for all of us. Health and care partners are working closely to develop a series of alert measures and indicators that will allow us to identify in real time when the infection rate is beginning to rise and provide us with maximum warning time for us to respond in the most appropriate manner. Within Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, we are confident we can rapidly mobilise additional capacity to deal with predicted increases in demand from COVID-19. Colleagues are also reviewing and supporting the implementation of measures to enable local services to adapt to changes to our previous ways of working that are safe and enduring for staff and patients. We also recognise that locally, one size does not fit all. And finally, there are just a few key messages I'd like to share. And the big one is, it's not over. We need to remind ourselves regularly of this fact and maintain government recommended and quite frankly common sense measures to reduce the risk of spreading COVID-19 and to avoid further peaks. We need to appreciate the context within which the health and care services are managing this next stage of the emergency. There is growing unmet need, as I've said, but we need to adopt a level of realism about what we can and cannot be achieved, or what can and cannot be achieved safely over the coming weeks and months. Finally, we should not forget the sacrifices made and the 24-hour, 7 days a week dedication of health and care workers, all intent on defeating COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And we'll move next to business and visitor economy. Mark Dudridge, please.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. Thank you all. I think since the COVID pandemic has hit us, the business community has been working really constructively together in a number of different cells, primarily informing each other and colleagues in the community of the impact that the lockdown was having, but also talking very effectively to government, both nationally through the different ministries, through our MPs, and through local governments as well. And I won't reiterate the impact that Julian has been through, but I think what we are facing at the moment is a profound impact, which is probably going to be economic impact, which is probably going to be hardest hit and most longest lasting of anywhere in the UK. So the work so far with the Business Cell and with the LEP has been, and I think the other members of the other representative business groups, I know Toby will be speaking later on, their support has been invaluable. So lots of the work in the early days has been looking at and informing ourselves of what actually is happening, and the pace of change was extraordinary, but also making sure that there was a speedy application of funds to support the liquidity of as many businesses as we can do in the short term. And that work continues. And secondly, within that, also to look at protecting any investment funds which are available for Cornwall, St Ives and Scilly, be it capital funds or revenue funds, which might be coming from private sources, from UK growth funds, or from European monies. And that work clearly continues and impacted by the slowdown and the practicalities of doing business within COVID. But increasingly our thoughts are starting to develop, turn to the future and looking to develop that roadmap to recovery. Much of this work is based on the previous work done around the local industrial strategy, which is still highly relevant, although the priorities of some of those pieces of work have clearly changed. And in so doing, we'll continue and have continued to talk to businesses individually and collectively through council colleagues, through other LEP areas nationally, but particularly around the Great Southwest, around which we share many key opportunities and threats, and clearly with some international partners. And amidst all the sort of gloom and meltdown of our economy, there are still emerging some core areas which I think will be the new bedrocks of a future Cornish economy, where we are genuinely globally competitive and are seeing progress even amidst the COVID crisis. So I would look at particularly energy, and there's been a lot of press around floating offshore wind, and we are working particularly actively to try to bring that to a head, around data, around space, around georesources, and a lot of our software businesses are doing very well. But we are very well aware that some of our core businesses, particularly visitor economy, when we talk about tourism later on, food and drink, have to be reinvented going forward, given the likely longer term impact of COVID and how, in terms of spending in the economy and about behaviours in the economy. We know that we're going to have to respond quickly to the future skills requirement of everybody in Cornwall and cities to get more people better equipped to get back into work and support more people back into work quickly. So the skills agenda will be very key. And we'll also look to see how we can best exploit maybe future post-COVID models for people living and working digitally away from their traditional workplaces, and that probably bodes very well for Cornwall. But in the meantime, as Julian described, the impact of COVID on our economy has been absolutely profound. The pace of change has been staggering, and we are faced with the prospect of our traditional productivity challenge being swamped in a way by an employment challenge, and the prospect that actually it's going to be years for many of our core sectors to recover from what's happened over the last few weeks. So the continued support of the business cells, of the business representative groups, and all partners working together to help define this roadmap will be absolutely key. And I thank you for everybody's support so far.
Thank you very much, Mark. Toby Parkins next, please.
Hello. Thank you, Chairman. So I'd like to support what Mark's just said. Specifically, the impact to the economy immediately in the short term is one of the most significant, well, obviously in living memory and longer. It will be a very different type of recession to what we're used to. It will affect some sectors and some businesses more significantly than others, but overall, the collective effect of it is going to be really significant, and I think everyone has to be supportive, particularly of the government and the council in their the support that has been provided. It's been quite quick, and that's certainly helped initially in the early stages of lockdown. The swift response was very well received. Of course, there is always a downside to any kind of swift response like that, in that there's always some gaps, and it's good to hear that the discretionary fund was released. I'm looking forward to hoping that the government are going to reappraise the size of that to ensure that there is some subsequent funding for the businesses that have not been able to be supported so far. And I think it's also important to recognise that there are still businesses that have missed out on support, and particularly so all businesses that where there's a limited company and directors who have particularly missed out. But then there's also other case studies where businesses that are based from working from home, they don't necessarily have any formal property related costs, and therefore have not necessarily been supported under any existing mechanisms. And I would urge government to look at some of those in more depth. I think it's really important to recognise that all business support organisations have really come together and collaborated really effectively during this time. So over the past few months, there have been, that everyone has really stepped up to, meeting far more regularly, partly through the business support cell, but also interactions between all the business support organisations, both those that are funded by government and obviously for EU funded programs. Lots of these programs have stepped up very quickly to provide additional support to businesses during these challenging times. I think it's also important to recognise that lots of businesses have been stepping up to support one another, and I think this is a brilliant example actually of how the Cornish spirit has really come through, and you can see exactly how businesses really feel that they need to support one another, they need to collaborate, they need to work together, and to identify the solutions, to identify how to work together to improve prospects for the future. And I think that's a theme that we need to be mindful of moving forward, that if we can help build that culture of businesses supporting one another at the moment in this time of extreme need, actually that culture going forward will actually help Cornwall in the longer term, in terms of identifying ways in which businesses can collaborate to identify new export markets, new local and new international markets, new methods of delivering services and products, and that kind of innovation actually leads me on to my final point, where whilst there are lots of challenges coming up over the next few months and years, whenever you have times of challenges, there are also opportunities, and it's really important that we recognise that some of those opportunities, if supported well, and if we can encourage businesses to identify those solutions or identify how to tackle challenges differently, you will end up with lots of fine examples where businesses actually identify ways of actually growing through these challenges. And ultimately, that means I think we really do need to be thinking positively about how we support businesses going through those changes, pivoting, identifying new markets, and ultimately becoming stronger in the short, medium and long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Toby. Councillor Taylor next, please.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. So I've been working with Derek Thomas, my MP, down in the St Ives constituency. So for all of us, tourism is absolutely vital to the economy of Cornwall. And anyone who understands the economy will understand the importance. We've been working together with accommodation providers, national institutions, the bid managers, the police, looking at how we can safely recognise that the tourism industry will need to come back and open up successfully. So accommodation providers and those who work in tourism are local residents who fully recognise the need to ensure that the families and elderly and vulnerable relatives are kept safe. The welfare of our guests and the community is at the heart of all businesses. So we were working together to put a robust measure to protect everybody's safety. Tradesmen and women, retailers, transport providers, farmers, and those involved in the fishing industry are just some of those who have been severely impacted by the collapse of the tourism. A safe and measured tourism recovery is paramount if these businesses are to survive. Anyone who has taken part is acutely aware of the need to proceed with caution because the long-term future of tourism in Cornwall depends on us getting it right. I want to thank the expertise and the commitment of the group that I've been working with, and the way that they've been addressing the issues faced with them have been absolutely invaluable. And it's gone a considerable way to measuring and helping the anxiety and concerns, certainly within our community. The message that we are also giving out is, well, that when we enter into tourism, it will be because the government have invited us, because we're going to be following their guidelines. We're going to be following the science. And our message to everyone who's wanting to come into Cornwall, we welcome you when it's right, and we will welcome you to come and enjoy the benefits that Cornwall has here. But don't forget, because you're on holiday, you still have those responsibilities, and washing your hands, maintaining that social distance and being mindful of our community is absolutely paramount. We feel that we've now got the group that we've been working with in a really, really successful launch, and they've had to adapt, as has everybody, and a considerable amount of time and money has been spent in the preparation of getting our tourist business and our visitor attractions ready. So I want to say thank you to everybody out there. Tourism is important, it's absolutely key, and here in St Ives especially, we will be welcoming our visitors to Cornwall and to St Ives in a careful and measured way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. A good introduction to the paper on tourism that we'll be having as the next item. Councillor Painter next, and then I'll be going to the perspective from the Isles of Scilly. Councillor Painter, thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. I'd like to focus a little bit on council finances and the impact of COVID, because I think the council is a very multifaceted business, supplying lots of services with lots of different types of income. So COVID has had a massive impact on the council, but we have moved and looked at how we can alter our budgets to make sure that we can find a way forward for the council. The cost of COVID at the moment is estimated around £44 million to the council. We have had a grant from government of 34.4 million, which is clearly a help, but some 10 million short. What's not included in the cost of COVID is home to school transport, which we know is a major issue and could cost up to £13 million, depending on rules on social distancing and when schools are fully reopened, how we get those children to school potentially is going to cause us a problem. Also, what's not included is the impact of council tax and business rate collection and how that may reduce over the coming months, which really will put the impact into next year and could really hit council finances very hard going forward into next year and beyond. Some of the big challenges we've got are clearly around things like leisure centres, which are going to find a difficulty to reopen when they're allowed to, because again of social distancing and how they'll work and people's ability to use them. And also Cornwall Airport Newquay, which we all know has been closed and not yet reopened, and again challenges for our airport. Just other things that potentially we don't really think about, but the council's lost over £1 million in marriage ceremonies and other types of ceremonies, and that's lost income that pays for other services within Cornwall. So clearly car parking charges is an obvious one with our car parks, many of them either being closed or not taking any money over the lockdown period. So whilst they have now been switched back on and enforcement measures have been switched back on, clearly there's a loss of income there as well. So we will be looking and working and lobbying with government to look at how we can have some income guarantees going forward. And that's not just us as a council, that affects every council up and down the land. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Painter, and to Councillor Robert Francis next for the Isles of Scilly. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Thank you. Welcome to everybody from the Isles. A big welcome from the Isles of Scilly. We are very, very pleased that we can still report that as far as we're aware, we still have no cases of COVID on the Isles of Scilly, which has obviously been a huge relief and help for our community so that we've been able to we haven't had to test the difficult island location that we're in. However, we are very well prepared, and I want to thank very much indeed our teams here on the islands who have prepared us with all the emergency planning measures for when a case may happen on the island. We're also pleased that we had and still have ongoing support from the Royal Navy in our emergency planning. We've had great support for our community, so a big thank you to everybody for preparing us in this extremely difficult time. We've heard from other councillors at this meeting already about the importance of tourism in Cornwall. However, I should make those that are not aware that we have 85% of our economy based on hospitality in the islands, and the other 15% are reliant on those hospitality businesses for their business. So we are effectively 100% reliant, rightly or wrongly, on tourism. And we are disappointed to date that we have not had further news about when the tourism economy may be able to open, albeit gently and safely. But those businesses obviously are extremely worried. Our community is very worried. I realise the government cannot make the announcement until they're ready. But with the 4th of July being talked about, it will be very welcome when we have some news, whatever that news is, in order that the islands can prepare safely to welcome back visitors. We have been very fortunate to have secured, with the help of Cornwall and our Transport Board, funding to keep our lifeline transport services operating. That's been a huge help to the islands. I don't know what we would have done without that. And we are in the phase at the moment where we are still working with government to try and secure funding to carry us through until the spring of next year, because clearly we've lost already half the year, and our lifeline transport operators need support to be able to continue through the winter period. So that's been a big focus for us at the moment. We have a number of issues on the islands relating to our tourism economy, which are different from Cornwall and other parts of the country. Obviously, the basic tourism operation, be it self-catering, hotels, B&Bs or whatever, will be the same as the mainland. However, in view of our location, we have situations like, for example, what would we do if a visitor to the islands was infected, and we have to make, obviously they cannot go home in their car from the Isles of Scilly. We would have to make arrangements either for them to stay in their accommodation, to stay in alternative accommodation, or indeed be transported back to the mainland. And all of those scenarios pose significant issues, because if you cannot re-let your accommodation on a date because you've got somebody isolating in that accommodation, who pays for the cancellation, so there's a number of issues which we are working really hard at the moment to resolve. Visit Cornwall have been very helpful to us, as have Cornish councillors and our MPs, and we're hoping that we can find bespoke guidance to be able to deal with these issues as and when we are allowed to welcome visitors cautiously and safely back to the islands. But we are trying to find solutions for all our issues. We're working very positively to do that, and our guests will receive a very warm welcome when at last we are allowed to welcome them back to the Isles of Scilly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Francis. Councillor Grottick, would you like to add to Councillor Francis's comments?
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick word. I think the Chairman has outlined most of our unique challenges, and because of that, I'd just like to totally support our wish for bespoke arrangements for the islands. And this bespoke situation, carefully planned, including track and trace and a gradual opening up, will assist us in being fleet of foot and adapting as we move forward. Our ongoing support needs will include the collaborative working that many colleagues have alluded to, which will be hugely helpful, financial support, hopefully ongoing, and mental health support, as obviously many businesses on the islands are facing great challenges at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grottick. And representing Cornwall's Town and Parish Councils, Helen Price, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman. CALC has acted as a single point of contact for parish and town councils during the COVID-19 emergency, making all of its guidance and templates available to local councils regardless of membership. We have produced 10 frequently asked questions and answers bulletins covering arrangements for governance, employment and working arrangements, risk management and managing open spaces. It's also have published a number of guides and supplements, including the standing orders to support the regulations for virtual meetings, a guide to undertaking risk assessment, a guide to public toilet risk assessment and templates, a directory of useful websites and organisations providing specialist advice, and also have triaged mental health, where there are now over 25 people have used that system. Early on in the shutdown, CALC consulted with the sector to identify the potential financial impact of the pandemic on local councils, and has worked with Cornwall Council to seek a change in the regulations for local council borrowing, which has now been sent to government. We have undertaken 3 surveys of the local council sector, and that was to look at the impact on the financial position of local councils during the lockdown, an assessment on public toilet provision across the county, and a temperature check on forthcoming issues and the confidence of local councils and councillors, and hopefully that we will be able to share the results next week. Our county officer has taken part in meetings of the community cell, the Cornwall Executive Group, there's National County Officers Forum, the South West regional meetings, and is a member of working groups on the LGA Code of Conduct and virtual meetings panel to develop best practice. By working with the partners across the county, regionally and nationally, it has been able to share best practice. The effectiveness of the structures and working relationships in Cornwall was recognised by NALC at a recent meeting. Through the larger Councils Committee, CALC has held events to support councils in reopening the high street and reopening of public toilets. It will be working on a new bid for funding to promote culture events in towns in support of the local economy. CALC has now started preparatory work to produce guidance on the reopening of playgrounds and play parks in preparation for when the government makes an announcement on further easing of restrictions. We have learned by the experience of reopening some outdoor facilities that local councils are open to criticism if they respond differently to the utilitarian authority. It is vital that these services and facilities are provided by a number of partner organisations. We all work together under a single message to keep Cornwall safe. At the end of March, using the cell structure, Cornwall worked together to shut down the county. CALC is keen that we all work together to reopen it safely. Thank you, Chairman.
Absolutely, thank you, Helen. And the impact on our environment and how the environment can form a focus for renewal. Kevin Gaston, please.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Are you okay, Kevin?
I'm okay, thank you. So the environment sector has been faced by heavy financial challenges to its component organisations, as well as challenges to access to the countryside for monitoring and management, and for providing provision for access to the general public. All those are going to be ongoing challenges for a long time. But what I'd really like to focus on here is that the COVID-19 pandemic has underlined key issues, I think, about our relationship with the natural environment. With other options largely removed, many people have turned to nature for escape, rest, recuperation, whether that be in gardens, public green spaces, or the wider countryside and the seaside. A YouGov survey for the RSPB that was published recently found that about 90% of people agreed that having access to nature was an advantage during the COVID-19 outbreak, and about 90% thought this access was good for their health and well-being. And I think that's particularly notable given all the challenges beyond the virus itself to people's mental health and so forth. So I think this has highlighted how important nature experiences can be, the need to maintain the opportunities for them, but also the potential that lies in retaining this engagement longer term. It's also highlighted how varied the provision of access to nature and natural resources can be, and the importance of ensuring greater equality in this regard across our population. In particular, we need to make sure that we increase access in the future for those who are disadvantaged in that regard. And we've had discussions around the need to start a program of mapping access and understanding where the pinch points are. We need to make sure that we don't erode the current provision that we have when creating new developments and so forth. And particularly important there is going to be an issue that the LNP has been very engaged with, which is the Net Gain programme, which is now being rolled out through the planning department. And third, where access is more limited, we need to make sure that the green spaces that we do provide are of high quality and able to withstand the levels of footfall that can be required of them. And the Making Space for Nature programme, which again the LNPs have been involved in and led by Cornwall Council, I think is a good example of how we can do that, how we can make that happen. The way in which we have, in some sense, been treading more gently on the landscape during the COVID-19 outbreak, with less car traffic, less noise pollution and so forth, has been good for some wildlife. It's emphasised the possibilities for a renaissance in the populations of many species. If we can learn ways of reducing our impact more generally and taking the environmental crisis seriously, this is where the environmental growth strategy of Cornwall plays a really key role. And the LNP is working hard at the moment in exploring how we're going to refresh that. That strategy is now up for a refresh. And I think that's particularly important at the present time and playing into thoughts around what happens in post-COVID, or at least as the immediate challenges of COVID perhaps decline as a virus, although clearly there are much broader implications. The LNP has also been focusing heavily on the approach to development of a nature recovery network, which is something which is sitting in the environmental bill for Cornwall. And again, that will play a very key role in shaping the future of nature in the region. Unfortunately, some people have taken the opportunity of COVID-19 outbreak to abuse the countryside. That's including through heavy littering, plastic pollution, fly tipping, unintentional or intentional setting of fires. And that has caused damage to some important wildlife sites. Obviously, enforcement's been more difficult and challenging during this period. But looking forward, the LNP is very anxious to help find ways in which we can address that problem more generally. Enforcement is clearly a major issue, both inside and outside COVID-19 periods. The COVID-19 period has seen reductions in carbon dioxide emissions, leading some to suggest that we have in fact been sort of modelling the kind of world that we might need to become in response to the climate emergency. That's only partially true. Estimates suggest that global carbon emissions will have declined by between 4 and perhaps maximally something like 7% during this period, 4 to 7%, which takes us roughly back to the levels that we might have seen in 2006. To address the climate emergency and restrict global rises in mean temperatures to about 1.5 degrees, we need to achieve similar levels of increasing reductions year on year, which I think is gives one pause for thought as to actually the scale of the climate emergency challenges, and particularly in light of all the other pressures that other people have been talking about here, and particularly the financial pressures that go on into post COVID-19. I think this emphasises really the vital importance of placing the climate emergency at the heart of our plans for recovery, renewal. It's going to have to permeate everything that we do if we're going to deliver the objectives that we've set ourselves. And finally, I'd like to say that one of the things that is encouraging from a lot of the survey work that's been going on is that they show that a high proportion of people do not want to return to the world as it was pre-COVID-19, and they want a new normal, and that much of that normal should involve positive responses to environmental emergencies and climate emergencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And we've also had very strong attendance from our MPs or their representatives throughout as we've been meeting as the informal leadership board. The MPs are represented by Steve Double MP, but I'd like to take the opportunity to thank them all, and I know that Scott Mann MP is also observing this meeting. So thank you all. Steve.
Thank you very much, Julian. As everyone has said, I mean, this has just been one of the the most intense time I think any of us have experienced as an MP, trying to provide help and advice and support to literally hundreds of MPs and constituents and businesses every day, working with the police, as you say, working with the council and the leadership board, the NHS, care homes and charities locally, just to provide the support needed. A number of things that I and the other MPs have particularly focused on during this time. The challenges around PPE provision have already been mentioned, and we certainly worked with the council and the LRF to make sure that Cornwall's case was put forward, and we certainly got Cornwall bumped up the priority list in terms of provision of PPE, and I think it was a testament of a real joint team effort across Cornwall, working together to address those challenges and get into a much better place now, and we understand, you know, there are still concerns going forward, but certainly I think we're in a reasonably good position now, and I just want to say big thank you to RCHT in that, because they particularly were incredibly helpful on that issue. In terms of funding, Adam's already mentioned the 34 million that the government made available to Cornwall Council, and I understand from ministers that that was in line with what the council asked for. I acknowledge that there are some ongoing pressures within that, and I'm also very aware of the pressures that some of our town councils are facing at the moment, and can assure everyone we continue to work with the government to make sure that Cornwall gets at least its fair share of the funding that is being made available. I think it's worth noting that so far Cornwall has had over £444 million worth of direct support from government, largely through the council. And the other big area has clearly been business support. Again, has already been highlighted by Mark and Toby and others. The huge impact that the current crisis is having on the economy of Cornwall. I think we recognise that Cornwall is going to be one of, if not the most severely impacted parts of the country. Government has done a lot, and I think again it's widely acknowledged that the way the government stepped up and quickly got funds available was very, very welcome. I know in my own constituency we have over 20,500 people either furloughed or on the self-employment support scheme, and if that's reflected, which I believe it is across the county, we have probably over 100,000 people across Cornwall on one of those two schemes. But clearly the focus now needs to be going forward and recovery, and I'm sure we're going to talk about in the report in a moment, getting our economy back open as soon as it is deemed safe to do so is going to be very, very important. And then to continue to work with the council, with the LEP, with the leadership board in making the case to government for the support that Cornwall is going to need to recover from this huge shock to our economy, and we'll continue to make the case for that and make sure that we clearly understand the impact that this is having on our economy, but we want to be in the best place possible to make sure we can bounce back from that as soon as possible. So we're kind of moving phases now of MPs where we've been very much in the supporting constituents and business in the midst of the crisis, to really putting our focus now on the recovery and how we can work together across Cornwall and with the government to get us out of this as quickly and as positively as we can.
Thank you very much, Steve. And in relation to policing and enforcement, Police and Crime Commissioner Alison Hernandez, if you'd like to come in next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose one of the things that all of us have been grappling with during this particular COVID period is getting the balance right, and it's getting the balance right between the restriction of our liberty and our safety. And now we're moving into a conversation about how we get the balance right around our economy and the impact that that's going to start having on us. So balance is what it's all been about. And I suppose in terms of the policing side of things and enforcement, it's been a very interesting and I would say strong and proud time, I think, for our community. So first thing is a huge thanks to our residents in Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, who have been, by the overwhelming majority, adhering to guidance and doing the right thing by supporting their neighbours and helping each other. Without that, we wouldn't be where we are today. I suppose I want to just share 6 things with you in my short 2 minutes. I want to talk about leadership, enforcement, crime, protests, victim care and justice. So just quickly in terms of leadership, I want everyone to be really clear that both the Local Resilience Forum, which is the immediate civil contingency formality that gets set up across Devon and Cornwall, has been led by ACC Glenn Mayhew in policing. So this entire response has been coordinated across Devon and Cornwall by the police. And we've also had ACC Glenn Mayhew, this is Assistant Chief Constable, leading the GOLD response, which is the crisis response for the policing approach during this period. So he's had quite a heavy weight on his shoulders, and I believe that partners and our community will appreciate that he's done a good job when I share with you some of the information. So in terms of what we've been doing, I think the biggest thing that's important for people to realise in terms of this crisis, we've had to, and I've taken lots of complaints from residents wanting more enforcement, and I've also had complaints even from a member of Parliament in Devon saying we want less and let people go about their business more. So we've had real extremes of views around how the policing approach should be taken during this period. And I want to say that we were in the top 3 areas in the country for police forces for issuing the fixed penalty notices during this time. Number 1 was the Met, number 2 is North Yorkshire, and we were number 3. 986 fixed penalty notices during this time. By the way, North Yorkshire has the lowest crime rate in England and Wales, and we have the 2nd. So I think there may be something that's in common there about our approach to things. We've also been really clear because of this balance issue. One of the jobs that I've had to do is scrutinise the use of police powers during COVID. And I ran a scrutiny panel in early May with my independent scrutineers that are recruited from our community to look at body-worn video, to read reports, to do a workshop with frontline officers, to understand the guidance that was coming out nationally and look at the policing approach across Devon and Cornwall, and to just reassure you that in terms of that scrutiny, it came across very clearly that it was being used proportionately and appropriately and legitimately during that time. That report is available on my website, and I'd also like to highlight that anyone who wants to see the work of my office during this period, there will be a police and crime panel on the 3rd of July, and there will be a full report about our COVID response as an office. Just in terms of crime then, I want to be clear that just before we went into COVID, the Office of National Statistics released the crime statistics, and we were 2nd in the country for the lowest crime rate. We've never been number 2 before. Obviously, we want to be number 1. Very proud that we've managed to be one of the lowest. But as soon as COVID hit now, we've got a 20% reduction in crime that happened in the first few weeks with everybody staying at home. But there were a couple of areas of things that didn't reduce. So domestic abuse did not reduce during that period, and antisocial behaviour, as we started to come out of lockdown, has started to sort of rocket really in terms of what we are doing and going about our business. So because people are less managed when they're going out and using open spaces, because our economy is not fully open, it's a real policing challenge. So in terms of the next one around protests, you will be aware there's been a number of Black Lives Matters protests throughout the country. I want to be really clear that we don't take our standards from London or the Met. Our approach down in Devon and Cornwall is we've had 27 protests across our patch. We're the 9th highest in the country with the level of protest that we had, and 8 have been in Cornwall so far. You want to probably know we've had Truro twice, St Ives, Newquay, Lostwithiel, Camelford and Bude, and there's still more to come. We've had 5 arrests in total across Devon and Cornwall, 4 of which have been in Cornwall, and that was 3 for a fray from the protesters themselves and 1 which was a racially aggravated public order offence too. So I think it shows that we're police without fear or favour in Devon and Cornwall, and I hope it reassures you the proactive approach that our force has taken to work with both the protesters and anyone else who wanted to come out and organise and keep the peace. I'll just quickly move on to Victimcare. One of the things we've done really quickly, and if you want to go to victimcare.devonandcornwall.org.uk, 24/7 web chat and phone line available to you now if you want any help, emotional support, and they'll also help you identify what services are available. One big success was Operation Encompass Teachers Helpline, which we set up across Devon and Cornwall to help those teachers who were looking after key workers' children, who may not have known those children that they were looking after, set up a teachers helpline to help them make really good decisions if they were concerned about children that they were looking after. That has now gone national and been funded by the government. So we're really proud of, again, Operation Encompass is a Devon and Cornwall concept. It's gone across all of the forces now across the country for teachers to be able to ring in. Just in terms of justice then, one of the bits that I'm moving to and have been trying to lobby quite a lot during this period is the fact that our courts are closed. So at the moment, we haven't had any criminal jury trials down here since we went into lockdown. And I'm really concerned because the 2 areas of the criminal justice system that have been working relentlessly since we went into it is the police force and the prisons. Face to face, cannot get away from it, dealing with offenders. Unfortunately, our probation colleagues and court colleagues still haven't got their full act together, and we need to really help them get back online. So I'm working with our MPs to look at what we can do in terms of trying to get a plan for dealing with that, because the backlog at courts is really growing by the day, to the extent that even if they open the courts back up now, they will not get back on top of that workload. So really important, I think, that we make an effort to ensure that we don't lose confidence in our justice system, and that's the sort of main focus moving forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. And in terms of your comments about the policing response to Black Lives Matter, the board will remember that we previously jointly agreed the equality and diversity strategy, and I'm sure that probably our next meeting it would be worth revisiting the actions that we've all taken to tackle racism within our communities and ensure that we're working towards an equal society. And it's great to hear the testimony of all of the partnership work and that's happened to help us get through the challenge of coronavirus. We'll absolutely need that partnership working to move through renewal and make sure that Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly can take a whole system approach to recovery and renewal. So Appendix 1 sets out a proposed framework and governance arrangement focusing on recovery and renewal for our communities, our economy and organisations. Climate change and inequality feature across all 3 cross-cutting themes. The report seeks the board's endorsement of the recovery framework and the proposed governance structure through partnership working, coordination and facilitation. Within this recovery framework, it would be appropriate for the board to consider the frequency of its formal meetings, and board members' views will be welcome. The report also proposes that we further strengthen the leadership board by extending membership to the independent chair of the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Health and Care Partnership Senate, who bring immense value in providing representation across the health and social system. So, colleagues, if there's anything that you would like to say in relation to the report, in relation to extending membership, if you'd like to put your hand up, as Chris has done, we'll have that discussion. If that discussion hasn't changed the recommendations, then we'll move to the recommendations as they are laid out currently. So, Chris, if you'd like to come in first, please.
Thank you. It's a request, really. I mean, I support the recommendations. It's to do with the proposed governance structure. And I would suggest that we actually take an action to reflect upon our revised leadership role with respect to C19 and our interaction with these other bodies that are already in situ, and just do a sort of summary review of what worked well and what didn't, and take it as a formal action to do that, and that will then help us moving forward, perhaps to improve our relationships and perhaps help us with our decision making and advice and guidance. So it's more of an action to sort of just reflect on how it worked.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris, for that suggestion. I'm happy to take it on board, unless we have people speaking against it and we have more of a debate. But absolutely, learning those lessons is something I feel that we should be doing. Kate Kennelly, please.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of comments on the report, if I may, Chairman. So firstly, having been able to listen in on the informal leadership board meetings over the last 12, 13 weeks and hearing today the accounts, we are definitely stronger together. And going forwards as we move into recovery, I wanted to confirm that sitting underneath the governance arrangements in Appendix 2, the Cornwall Executive Group has been looking at how it is involved, and that members of the Cornwall Executive Group are involved in all of the 3 different elements of the recovery that's set out, and have got a recovery coordinating group that will be taking that overview and being able to make recommendations through to the leadership board going forward. So as executives, we're absolutely committed to making sure that as we move into the next phase, we don't go back into our organisations and do things separately. We continue to be stronger together through working in this collaborative way going forward. So we will be able to share outside of here the mapping of the individual members of the Cornwall Executive Group into that governance structure that's set out in Appendix 2. To Chris Blong's suggestion, just to confirm that through this approach, we are seeking to be a learning system. So the Local Resilience Forum does formal debriefs. We're also, as we're moving out of response, doing lessons learned and thinking about how that links into the overarching priorities for recovery that are set out in Appendix 1. I'm confident that we'll be able to bring a consolidated version of that links into those objectives and the priorities of the leadership board to a subsequent meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So I haven't got anyone else with a hand up. I'm aware Councillor Francis Grottek and Price, you haven't got that facility. Would any of you like to come in? Just pause for a moment. No, I don't think so. Oh, Alison Hernandez would like to come in. Alison, please.
I was just wondering if it would be helpful if we're a bit more explicit around helping communities understand the risks for them to make their own decisions about it, because at the moment, one of the things that I learned during the COVID period is when I spoke to people who said, well, can I do this or can I do that? I would explain what the risks were around it and the consequences of it. Then they've got the full information to make a decision that is right for them and their families. And I think it would be really helpful to perhaps be clear that we want to help people understand the risks so that they can be responsible. It's just a thought in terms of being a bit clearer about that. But if it doesn't affect the report. We probably don't need to make any amendments. It's probably worthwhile just bearing that in mind. I think when we're going forward, it's about helping people understand the risk to take the responsibility themselves, so that we're not telling people how they should be making decisions about their own families on some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Before I bring Kate back in, anyone else? Or was Kate's hand from before? Kate? No, Mark Doddridge, please.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I support the paper. I think on the economic development and the recovery element of it, we are going to be looking for talking to partners, private sector monies, new investors this part of the world, as well as government structural funds. So I don't disagree with the paper at all, but I think we need to be mindful that different people will be talking to different partners, different business sectors. So we need to keep all that
absolutely
coordinated, but be aware that I think there'll be other conversations going on the side from it, which hopefully we can bring back to this board and make sure we're all along.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Thank you. Kate, next then, please. No, Kevin.
Yeah, just a very brief request, really. There is a line in here which talks about environmental impact being assessed and managed against Cornwall's climate change action plan. Could we add in there and the environmental growth strategy, please, given that that's a core strategic goal?
Yeah, so that's in the text of the report rather than the recommendations. Yeah, we can do that, Kevin. Thank you for raising that. Okay, Kate.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just in response to Alison Hernandez's point around the importance of those ongoing conversations, and that we're in it together across with our residents. And I think this is going to be at the heart of our local outbreak plan and the communications that form that, because this will be the way within which, as we continue to open up parts of our society and our economy in line with our recovery, that we'll be wanting to keep that dialogue, that in exchange for doing that, can you please play your part? And that obviously is a key essence of the tourism paper that we're going to be considering next. So I can confirm that approach is absolutely implicit in the work that we're building on the local outbreak plan, which needs to be submitted by the end of June for Cornwall, and a similar approach is developing in the Isles of Scilly, I understand, as well.
Thank you. So colleagues, I'm going to read the recommendations so that people watching are aware. So the recommendations are: the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Leadership Board formally endorses the recovery framework for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly as set out in Appendix 1, with continued collective support to achieve this across leadership board organisations. The Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Leadership Board supports the proposed governance structure set out in Appendix 2 and the board's role within this of providing strategic oversight and place leadership to support a whole system approach to recovery and renewal through partnership working, coordination and facilitation. Membership of the Leadership Board be extended to include the independent chair of the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Health and Care Partnership. So if you'd like to raise your hand to vote in favour, and the Democratic Services Officer will conduct the vote. Thank you.
Julian, could I just come in a minute, please?
Yeah, go on, Linda.
I just want to express some concerns. If there's any implication into this proposal, that there's any commitment, financial commitment from Cornwall Council, would that be something that would be brought back to the council and its elected members and the scrutiny process?
All of the bodies represented at the Leadership Board need to make their own decision making. The Leadership Board doesn't tie bodies to expenditure. We need to agree in our own bodies first, and then if we've all got agreement, then we can agree something at the leadership board. The leadership board doesn't have decision-making powers to tie the constituent members.
Lovely. Thank you for that clarification, Julian.
Thank you.
Chairman, I can confirm that those recommendations have been carried. Just invite if there are any abstentions.
Okay, thank you. Oh, we'll put our hands down. Thank you. So the next item then is the restarting tourism for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. We've obviously heard a bit about this already. I certainly want to acknowledge how difficult the current situation is for residents and businesses, and to recognise that the discussions around the opening of the tourism industry are a balancing act in which we must consider important public health issues, economic impacts, which stretch across the whole of our region. We know that we've been hardest hit, and a second spike would not only put lives at risk, but may lead to a further lockdown, which would have further devastating economic consequences for our business. So, as Councillor Taylor said, government will make the decision about how and when the tourism sector will reopen, but I hope we can discuss and agree today is how we can best support the tourism industry, our communities and our visitors to adapt to reopening safely and appropriately. So, Mark Dudridge, if you'd like to lead, please.
Great, thank you, Julian. Thank you, everybody. We've heard a few times this afternoon that this industry is fundamental to the sustainability of many of our communities within Cornwall and arguably all of the Isles of Scilly. We know we're one of the country's favourite destinations for holidays, short breaks or day trips, and that stretches across all ages. And we also know that the closure of our holiday accommodation, our hospitality outlets, has not only profoundly impacted on tourism per se, but also all the related industries. So it could be marine, creative, food and drink, retail, agriculture, transport, and our cultural attractions. We do know that as a country in this county, if we get this wrong, there's a potential for tens of thousands of job losses. And we know that already many businesses have failed and there's countless more teaching on the edge. So Cornwall, as Scilly, by our nature, have been welcoming and outward-looking places, and everybody here, I think, wants to see the industry open up as soon as it is possible to do so, but to do so safely. I think nobody who owns a business in Cornwall or the Scillies wants to get this wrong. However, it is clear that unlocking the industry will not, nor cannot, see a return to how things were, at least for the immediate future. Communities and visitors will be nervous of future infection and will rightly demand new ways of interacting and living alongside of each other. Although the foreseeable future will only be able to safely welcome reduced numbers who will cost disproportionately more to accommodate, this will put further financial pressure on a sector which has already borne significant costs. So the local enterprise partnership, this is Cornwall, our local authorities have already been working very closely to bring forward measures and I think constructive suggestions on how we can move forward. And when government decides this sector as a whole can reopen. There are three key challenges which Malcolm has detailed in the paper, which we'll describe. And these are very similar to those of other popular tourist areas which Visit Cornwall has been working with extremely closely. So these challenges revolve around reopening safely and responsibly and successfully and managing the COVID impact to date.
Mark, sorry to interrupt. I just, I can hear you okay, but you're just a bit faint. So right, I don't know if...
Yell.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was the first challenge in the paper is reopening safely, responsibly and successfully and managing the impact, the profound impact we've described to date, maximising the speed of recovery for the visitor economy and ensuring that we, out of this, we develop a competitive, productive and sustainable sector going forward. So if you can hear me, there are three things we I'd hope that we'll discuss and agree on today. Firstly, is the ask of government to release in a timely manner their advice and guidance on how this sector can unlock and can demonstrate it safely to the community and to our guests. And this we can then correlate to the huge amount of work which has been done so far locally, and then to mention some of that, to establish best practice in this regard. And we know that we need to give particular thought to the need of the islands, as Robert Francis and Fran described. Second ask is to look specifically at the furlough scheme to make sure that it is refined to accommodate the gradual unlocking of our businesses in this respect, to avoid mass redundancies this autumn, and to allow for key skills to be retained ahead of next year's crucial season. And thirdly, to develop a sector-specific support package which will provide the liquidity and the necessary transport links through and beyond this winter and well into the spring of 2021, with then further support to create a more sustainable industry from an economic and an environmental point of view in the future. Malcolm will describe in more detail why each of these the above is absolutely vital, and we can I hope as a board we can agree common messages so that we can talk as one to our community and our guests as well as to Westminster. So pass over to Malcolm.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you, Mark. I suppose the first thing to stress is I'm just going to talk about the paper and pull out the key issues from it rather than a presentation. So it'll be about 10 minutes or so, maybe 10, 12 minutes. I think the first thing to say is this paper has got to be an iterative process. There's so many bits of unknowns, so many things that can actually change. The essence of the asks are absolutely right. The quantity of the asks is probably the challenge we've got at the moment. So, for instance, in the last, 24 hours ago, we were hoping there would be an announcement, but we do understand that's probably likely to be next week after the 1 metre, 2 minute meter review has been undertaken. Secondly, even this morning, the risk rate has gone down to level 3. So, things are moving a certain way. And although there's a lot of frustration in the industry about the guidance, and it's very clear from conversations yesterday with DCMS that if you pick up on the UK hospitality, the British holiday parks, even the Scottish guidance, actually we've been doing quite a bit to get people ready that will be online. So in kicking off with a bit of background, I think it is quite interesting, the stuff that even I've found out. We have got, I knew there were 37,000 jobs and the induced jobs, but it is 1 in 3 of all private sector jobs that are related to the visitor economy. And that's why it is a bedrock sector. I think it also highlights why everybody's got to work for a balancing of the economy. It might sound funny coming from the head of the tourist board, but the more you get a balanced economy, the more that actually helps the hospitality sector. Likewise, there are opportunities that will come out of this crisis. Particularly, people will be looking for quieter places to go at certain times of the year, travelling abroad less. So there are opportunities here to tackle out of season problems and extend that season and get more all year round jobs. But we've got to make sure we don't go backwards before we go forwards. You'll see in the paper the figures of over £600 million to date, and the danger of that rising anything up to £1 billion, which we hope we can avoid. But I suppose the next issue I'd like to say is the 3 winter scenario, which we're not quite there yet. We've had 1 winter, the businesses went into it with a very low cash position and high borrowing. They've had great support, particularly all credit to Cornwall Council and the grants and the government for the furlough scheme and the deferrals. But if we do operate in July, particularly August, that's damage limitation. Greatly welcome to damage the limitation on business viability, but then we've got to make sure we have a good autumn and if the virus comes back. So we're sort of very, very nervously and excitedly. The other one I think we've got to bear in mind is that at the peak of the season on a normal year, that's about 180,000 extra people a day, and that's a 34% increase in our population. One of the challenges we'll have is to make sure that we manage the situation, because obviously if that ever happened to 34, let alone up to 40, and some of the stuff we're handling with the media is to avoid people thinking it's a staycation boom and everyone can pile down here, because that would create some problems. But I'll pick those up later on. So I think the 3 areas I want to concentrate is a lot of stuff has gone on. I think in terms of the visitor economy, we had the sort of situation in March and April, which was very much focused about panic and real scares and coping with the financial issues all around it. May, there's been a lot of effort that's gone into actually helping, and certainly in June, helping businesses get ready and understand that alongside all the other risks they have to manage, they have to start thinking about how they manage COVID. So there's been a lot of work gone on there. Understanding from a lot of the businesses that we're working with is where will we be with capacity. So if we take scenario 1, which is looking likely that from the 4th of July, businesses will be able to open, what sort of scenario does that mean in terms of visitor numbers for Cornwall? Now, many of the holiday parks and particularly on the camping sites, even though it's been very popular and there might be a lot of popularity, when you start doing your risk assessment, looking at the use of shared showers and shared toilets, it means that many holiday parks are reducing their capacity by at least 50%. Hotels are looking at maybe up to 20% reduced capacity, and attractions are actually up by as much as 50 or more, depending on what happens with the 2 versus 1 metre. So that's why we believe that if we get the right messaging across, that 180,000 should actually be a lot less and nearer the peak at 130, which would be around a 20% increase, which I think we just got to accept is a good number. It actually helps in terms of the pinch points, hopefully helps the support structure like the NHS, because if anything, we really do want to manage a reduced number this year. But how do we do that? Well, the first thing is Visit Cornwall, thanks to the support of the LEP and the council and the funding, is we've opened up all their support to all businesses and working particularly strongly with Cornwall Public Protection. We've been doing quite a lot of webinars, quite a lot of work, distributing a lot of information, holding all sorts of things to get people on the process of risk assessment. And as I said, in holiday parks, that's evolved around with people reducing capacity by 50%. B&Bs are looking at reduced capacity because of the dining issue. In fact, we've got some great examples where they've created individual dining, and self-catering obviously are also looking at certain areas, and their biggest issue is probably not capacity, it's the time spent in cleaning the whole cottage. So the whole social distancing is a big issue in some areas. The extra hygiene of cleaning between stays is another big issue, but that's what we've been working on, and then increasing the public messaging. So coming on to the actions for reopening, I've described those in terms of the training. There is an ask in there, which is probably one that's not going to happen, about compulsory registration. One of the challenges we all faced when we went into COVID was we didn't know who was providing accommodation, who wasn't. And in the last few years, there's been a great growth in new platforms, Airbnb being the biggest. And I've certainly got nothing against Airbnb per se, but actually when we came out of this process, we do need a very strong message to all accommodation providers that they have a responsibility legally, regardless of how many people you have. It just depends the style of the risk assessment, whether it has to be written or not, that you must have taken a risk assessment on behalf of not only normal risks, but also COVID. And we've just had some research in that 70% of visitors will be looking for reassurance, either an accreditation scheme or details on the websites of what businesses have done. So I think the big first thing on the reopening actions is to get the message out to accommodation providers that you must have done this, you must have mitigated, and if you haven't, you shouldn't be opening, and then provide the support that's there. The second message that we are in the process of finalising, sort of got used a bit last night, is the, I'm going to zizz it up a bit, is the fact that if you think and plan ahead and book ahead, you can have a bit of fun in that process. You know, the fun of enjoyment. Maybe people have got maybe a bit too blasé and lazy and rock up and then say, what do I do? We want the very strong message to go out to people. First of all, you've got to book your accommodation. If you haven't booked your accommodation, you shouldn't be coming, and you should look and make sure you book before you come. But when you do book, you're going to also have to book dining experiences, eating out, and attractions. And that can be fun. And also, I think the big thing we want to get across, and this might be one of the nice legacies, is there's lots of hidden gems in Cornwall. There's a great, wonderful area around Rame. There's lots of other areas. There's lots of wonderful little niches and coves you can walk to. So that whole area about discover a bit more of Cornwall and the hot spots, also discover more about the culture and the heritage, gives us a real opportunity to showcase other aspects of it. One of our asks of government is, in one way, can we increase signage on the roads in whatever way to reinforce messages, particularly about book ahead and keep your social distancing and leave an area if it's busy or getting busy. But also around the whole area, the national message should be about make sure you book before you come. So there's lots of areas in there we wanted to talk about. The transport issue, I think, has been raised, absolutely vital for the Isles of Scilly, but also we also want to get the message right that we need support for other areas, particularly around charter boats and other small niche activities. And we've got lots of experienced providers that have grown, and we need to make sure they supply. One of the areas of concern on here, point out, and one we want to do very strong, and thanks for all the activities gone on before, is the shop local. We know that the supermarkets obviously are reduced capacity in terms of number of people they can have in. We see that as a pinch point. You know, if we can encourage visitors to plan ahead and book ahead, it might be we have to encourage them to bring some of their essential supplies, but we as Visit Cornwall, and we'll pass that out to everybody else, we want to talk about use your local shop, use your food box, veggie and more, the Cornwall food box and all those sort of things. We want to get ahead so that we ease the pressures on supermarkets, but maximise the economic gain from shopping within the county. And I think we need to demonstrate to the community, particularly on the accreditation of being safe. I've had a presentation, a webinar with a company called Quality in Tourism, does national accreditation scheme. We've come out with an inspected scheme, or it's a check scheme. And I've said to B&Bs, if you're in a residential road, or if you're self-catering in a residential area, you know, we would recommend, even though you don't have to, that you go to full accreditation for your COVID safe issues, and certainly take up the national kite mark, which might well release next week, but the AA have come up with a kite mark. So prove not only to your guests and staff, but prove to local residents what you've done. One thing that came across that needs to be added to this paper is actually there's been quite an impact on closure, not from residents, but also from visitors on the third sector. People like the RNLI and even equally importantly, the air ambulance, you know, have lost revenues because of lack of retail, and often that's some donations from visitors. So it has gone a lot further. Likewise, there are still anomalies. There are businesses, furnished holiday lettings, and these are not second homeowners. These are people who do it for their primary living, who, because they're paid council tax, haven't had any support whatsoever. So I think any extension to the discretionary grant highest priority should be those people whose primary income is coming from an activity and in the visitor economy, and they haven't had any support. And some of those are in the supply chain as well. Moving on now about maximising the safe recovery, I think I've covered a lot of that. The one thing I would say, and we're working with excellent accountants, other ones are available, but at the moment we're working with Francis Clark, who have done a lot of the C-bill cash flows. And it's very clear from what we're picking up is that there's going to be a really bad cash crunch next March. When this happened, cash was at its lowest level and borrowing was at its lowest level. They're even lower now. But when they open up, because of the winter, next March is quite critical. So lots of the things like deferred payments, starting your C-bill or your bounce back payment, and all of those activities will have to be paid in March when the businesses will be in a worse state. So some of these recommendations are about not being written off, but saying can they be deferred a bit longer and spread out about repaying, so that the businesses are repaying them when they have the money in the bank rather than when they're not in the bank. And I think, again, it's some other issues we can develop as this plan develops, in that ways that are sensible not only for businesses in Cornwall, but are affordable for the government. I think lastly on challenge 3, it's a horrible phrase used in corporate structures, and never waste a crisis, and it seems a bit cruel. But I think this has shown that we do need to fundamentally have a look at the visitor economy, to look at where we need to push this. The customers have changed, the world has changed a bit. We've got a lot of great strengths, and I've got long-term faith in Cornish tourism. But maybe when we come out of this and move forward and see investments over the next 5 years, that it moves us into a stronger direction of heritage cultural tourism, sustainable tourism, all year round tourism, which there are markets for there. We've identified that I'm in my 60s. In fact, I'll be 65 this year, which is a bit of a shock. But I've realised I've got to stay fit, and lots of people want to stay fit, and Cornwall can deliver that out of season. Likewise, the well-being. It's not just about mental. It's not about physical. It's also about mental. The workation. I hate these marketing terms, by the way, but people have decided that they can do a bit of work while they're, working from home on the technology we're using today. So that fusion between taking a holiday and staying in touch with work, or not missing out on that key meeting, can open up a lot more opportunities for us out of season. We don't want to grow the peak, we want to grow out of season. And likewise, all sorts of areas about, our guest houses and B&Bs becoming small apartment hotels and going upmarket and all year round. And the last one, there will be a generation where if bits of the national curriculum can be made fun and built into holidays, then that the family market will quite like that the kids are actually picking up, or children I should say, are picking up some education while having fun. And the last one, which I know is picked up in the Together Stronger, is that unfortunately this has probably hurt the levelling up agenda across the country because it has exposed our weaknesses. So I've galloped through there probably too fast. But what I want to say is, at the moment in writing this plan, I think in terms of making large submissions to the government on what we need, this needs to build and evolve over the coming weeks as scenarios become fact, and we can evidence and quantify the support that will be needed. We know the areas will need support. We don't know the depth of it. And the biggest worry I've got, I'll be honest, is that we need to have a good dialogue and a productive dialogue, because we've already seen the Headland Hotel is laying staff off. The biggest worry I've got is lots of businesses, if they're not sure of the ongoing support with things like a new version of furlough, based on saving the country money on universal credit, stuff like that, is that many businesses will look at their cash flow and say, right, 15th of October, we shut down, we lay off all the staff we normally keep on, and we'll open up next year to protect our cash position. And that's the bit we want to avoid. We don't want mass layoffs in September for businesses that traditionally stay open. So there's a lot more work to do, but it's a starter for 10. I'll describe this, and as the evidence and the quantification of that evidence comes out, we need to develop a fair, coherent ask for support from the government and others. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you to the ever youthful Malcolm. Thank you very much. And thank you for all of your hard work on behalf of the tourism industry, obviously before, but during these challenging times. Thank you very much. So Steve would like to come in first.
Thanks very much, Julian, and thank you, Mark and Malcolm, for your report, which I think is very welcome. I think it's a very fair and balanced report that presents the very real challenges that we know we're going to face, or we are facing, will go on facing, but also the positive message of what can be achieved. I think, as Malcolm referred to, the fact that formally the risk level has been reduced to 3 this morning does demonstrate we are now moving into a new phase of our fight against this virus, and a phase where we can start to see the visitor economy open up and start to come out of lockdown. And I think we've got to welcome that. I think, again, as was highlighted, the job losses that were announced last night at the Headland, and I know I spoke to other businesses who are on the brink of announcing more job losses in the coming days as well, highlights the very real risks that we face to thousands of jobs across the county if we don't find a way to enable businesses to open up as soon as possible. I think we are all very much aware of the concerns and the fears of many local people, and I think we all have to work together to put across a positive message, but in a way that respects their concerns, but does show that we are moving on we're in a very different place than we were in the build up to Easter, where there was a very clear message, and rightly so, don't come to Cornwall. But we have moved on now, and we have reduced the level of infection, and therefore it is the right time to start to move forward with this. I think the biggest thing I hear from the sector, I'm sure Malcolm would agree with this, is they just want a decision to be made and the guidance to be issued so that they know what they can prepare for. And I can assure everyone, I was on the phone this morning to 10 Downing Street, making that point very, very clearly, that we do need a decision, a date to be announced, and the guidance so that they know what they're working to. I suspect, and I genuinely don't know, but I do suspect that some of this has been caught up with the review of the 2 metre social distancing rule and the desire to announce things together. So again, it has been highlighted that businesses aren't working to 2 metres and then suddenly find they only have to maintain 1 metre in the near future. So I suspect that's what's happening, but I'm hopeful, and certainly the Prime Minister, I believe, has made some very encouraging, given some very encouraging words in the media today that an announcement will be made very soon. So I think we all welcome that. And I think part of we do just need to be very aware that we are giving a welcoming message to tourists. I'm very concerned about some of the anti-tourist sort of rhetoric that is being heard at the moment, because I think there is a real danger. People are going to go on holiday, and if they don't come to Cornwall, they will go somewhere else, and that could actually be very detrimental to our tourism sector next year and in the years to come if we're seen to be unwelcoming to tourists and give a very negative message. So I think it's important we all unite in a positive message, in a balanced way, representing the concerns and the ongoing risk, but at the same time a very positive message that we are open for tourists. And I think if we get that right, we can save lots of businesses and lots of jobs. And I do think there's a great opportunity next year, because I also suspect that next year fewer people will be travelling abroad for their holidays, and that puts Cornwall and elsewhere in the country in a very good place. So it's important that we protect our tourist industry and the businesses within it as much as we can this year, so that hopefully next year they're in a position to take advantage of that. So certainly support the report. I think it's a very good report. Happy to give it my full backing, and thank you to Malcolm and the others who were involved in producing it.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Taylor next, please.
Thank you, Leader. Malcolm, thank you for the report. Steve's actually said a lot of what I was going to say, but I will endorse the fact that obviously we are waiting for a decision and we're waiting for the guidance. And I really hope that when we get those, there will be a very, very positive message coming out from Cornwall to really make sure we do get our visitors coming here, as opposed to thinking that they are unwelcome. And whatever you can do to get that message out would be appreciated by everybody within the tourism industry within Cornwall. Now, Malcolm, I came across a situation today that was explained to me about wild camping. I've never heard of it before, but apparently this is quite a serious growing trend within Cornwall. And apart from the issues that obviously this is something we do not want to be encouraging, there are public health implications. So I don't know if this, you're nodding your head, so it's not a strange topic to you as it was to me, but anything we can do to help our farmers, open spaces to make sure that we do not see wild camping coming into Cornwall, which will be totally unregulated. Thank you.
Thank you. Alison next, please.
Hi, Malcolm. Thanks for all your hard work in terms of this particular work around the visitor economy. I mean, it's with your help that we understood when we put that summer policing bid into government about that Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly is the #1 domestic tourist destination. And London only beats us when you play in international visitors. So we know if people aren't going abroad for a holiday, we know we are going to still be that #1 destination. I'm less fearful that people will be turned away, but I think for us in terms of the policing challenge, which as we have done already in this crisis, that the police force have very much worked with the community to deliver an expected service that our community wants in the way that they want it. And at the moment, we've got quite a frightened community, very fearful, especially we've got an ageing population, and we need to do some more things, I think, to reassure the public. So we've got our local residents, we're going to need to reassure and remind, which is one of the things I think we keep forgetting, that whatever is going on in the public realm, if you wash your hands and adhere to the distancing yourself, you will keep yourself safe. So I think we've got some reminding and reassuring to do. But what I'm actually worried about, and you know we'll do our best that we can, that where businesses can't open fully or their capacity is majorly reduced, where are these people going to go? They're going to go to our open spaces that is an unmanaged environment. Unmanaged in terms of even facilities for toilets potentially, and certainly unmanaged in terms of alcohol level intake that you would get if you were at least buying from a licensed premise. So for us, we want to work with you and with the tourist economy about how we can really manage our public spaces, because we've seen quite a drop in assault with injury, so that's violence in our communities, and sexual offences since the evening and nighttime economy is now not open. So we know that is going to increase, and we want to do all we can to try and minimise that increase and work with the tourist industry around how we can do that. So it's a big ask and a big task, but I know we've had such good working together as a Cornwall Leadership Board and with yourself, Malcolm, that I'm sure we can come up with some solutions.
Thank you very much, Alison. Before I go back to Malcolm and Mark, Councillors Francis, Grottock and Price, would any of you like to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to reiterate the thanks to Malcolm and his team. Malcolm's technically visit Cornwall, but he's been a great support to the Isles of Scilly, which is much needed, as I've already explained today. So huge thank you to Malcolm and to Mark Duddridge for their work on Scilly's behalf. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Grottock or Price?
Yes, Helen Price here. Just a question for Malcolm. Thank you for that report. I'm thinking about the COVID infection. If somebody on a campsite gets it, say in one of the caravans, would the whole site have to be closed down again?
A public health question for you, Malcolm. Do you know the answer? A direct question, but
this is this is one actually, particularly for the Isles of Scilly, which we've actually placed with the head of tourism yesterday to speak to the minister today about clear guidance. Our understanding at the moment is it would depend on the local, the health people to decide. But on many occasions, our advice to people, and from public health advice, if somebody does feel they've got it or has got it, is to travel home if they can do safely by car, being driven or whatever. And obviously then each of the risk assessments does actually have an element within a campsite or a business if something happens and what they have to do. So it would depend of how much, but like the Police and Crime Commissioner, if people be keeping their distancing, it should hopefully be down to a small group, because there should be at least shared areas. But it's one in particular if the Isles are Scilly, but also when people come by public transport. If what happens if they're in a guest house and they go down, they came by train, because you can't put them back on the train. So it's one of the outstanding guidance issues, but it's one that we need clarity of before we open.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Helen. Going back to that, first ask around timely guidance. Toby Parkins next, please.
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Malcolm and Visit Cornwall for working so well to produce, such a comprehensive plan moving forward. I've seen that there's a video that will be being made available soon, and it's all about reassuring people that we are doing the right thing and doing it as safely as possible. And I'd just like to say thank you from many businesses that will be reassured and will be able to move forward positively. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. No other hands up at the moment. So, Mark and Malcolm, would you like to comment on what you've heard? I haven't heard any dissent from the three recommendations, the three asks that you've put forward. So it sounds as though we can endorse those. Malcolm, then Mark.
No, I think the one thing that came up is this issue. I mean, the wild camping, which came about from the wonderful book, The Salt Path. I suppose one of my concerns, and it's a really bizarre year for me to be saying this, is if we get another heat wave and everybody's got a great desire and we're saying book before you come and people turn up and they want to park up and wild camp and all things, it is this issue about enforcement and the issues. It's also one we want to say strongly to visit visit England. Is it should be a message to book up everywhere. We don't want to be the only place saying you've got to book before you come, because we don't want to send out a negative message. But I think there is a scenario we've got to keep an eye on, is if the weather does come very hot again, we might be having to work quite hard to make sure we don't end up with unofficial accommodation of all sorts. But the good Lord seems to be giving us cool weather at the moment. So not that I want a bad summer, but I wouldn't be upset if we didn't have a massive heat wave.
Thank you.
I think that's the overarching concern. Everything else we can cover, but again, it comes back to that enforcing thing. So thank you very much for all your kind words, and again, we'll work on behalf of everybody in the industry in Cornwall and support Scilly as well as best we can.
Thank you. Mark.
Yeah, just thank everybody for their understanding and comments. Just to reiterate what Malcolm said, I think this is an iterative process. Be driven by government, it'll be driven by people jumping in their car and coming down. And I think we need to keep talking to each other and responding and lobbying accordingly. So I'm hoping there is support for the three general principles. But I would also say through the leadership board, we need to keep an eye through the winter and spring next year, because we need to start defining what the support mechanisms will be for these businesses, because it will be difficult economically as well as in terms of the virus. And we need to start defining over the months ahead what needs to happen to make sure we don't lose our key skills and compromise our business, because Steve's right, next year could be a bumpy year, but it could start in a very rocky place if we're careful. So I think the agenda will move on, but thank you for everybody for their attention this afternoon.
Thank you. Democratic Services Officer, Jerry, can you confirm that I don't need to do anything? We've got consensus on the report, and those asks that were put forward. But do we need to move the vote?
No, I don't think so, Chairman. There's no formal recommendations. I think as a board, if you're happy to endorse the draft plan, in the knowledge that it's an evolving plan.
Yeah, excellent. No one spoke against that, so I'm sure we can take that as endorsed. Thank you. So the next item then is Stronger Together, Creffer Wardbath, a shared vision for Cornwall's recovery and renewal, with a shared case for the necessary devolved powers and funding. The Leadership Board has previously discussed its aim to shape its 2050 future vision for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly through our biggest ever public listening project. While we've lost time and capacity to COVID-19, it is more important than ever that residents have a strong role in shaping the Cornwall we want. This report builds on our strong track record of using our devolved powers to deliver real benefits for our residents. Despite the challenges and pressures of COVID-19, we have continued to deliver, and the latest devolution performance report shared with you all shows progress made in the final quarter of 2019-2020. In March, as a board, we also committed to refreshing our New Frontiers programme to ensure our future ambitions and offer remained as strong as possible. However, so much can change in the space of a couple of months. The Cornwall we serve today is profoundly different to the one of just a few months ago. Therefore, we come together today with a new paper proposing to draw together these two key pieces of work, seeking your endorsement to firstly develop a shared 2050 vision to inform our recovery and renewal, and also to secure the devolution of powers and funding to achieve this vision and to get the best outcome for this area from the government's autumn devolution white paper. It's more important than ever that we continue to provide collective strategic direction on priorities for future devolution in line with our recovery and renewal plans. The emergency response over the past few months has demonstrated the effectiveness of local solutions over one-size-fits-all central schemes. With Cornish towns already amongst the hardest hit by coronavirus and studies showing Cornwall's economy to be at the greatest risk when the Brexit transition period ends, the scale of the challenge demands that we make no little plans. Just as we've been stronger together in crisis, we'll be stronger together in recovery and renewal. Whilst this paper is about a shared vision for Cornwall, we'd also like to explore extending the work to involve the Council of the Isles of Scilly in encapsulating the island's ambitions for the future within a shared renewal vision. The report recommends that the Chair of the Council of the Isles of Scilly be invited to give consideration to this in discussion with the wider Council membership. So that's my introduction, colleagues. You've seen the paper and have the recommendations in front of them. I'll read those out before moving to a vote and whether or not they are altered in terms of the discussion. Steve, if you'd like to come in first, please.
Thank you, Julian. I very much welcome and support the report as it is. The one question I had really was where this fits into the Great Southwest agenda, which I know are similarly putting a proposal forward to this white paper later this year, and just what discussions you've had with the Great Southwest group and what the impact of what Cornwall is putting forward has on the Great Southwest vision.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Steve. So we're looking forward to the Great Southwest APPG next week. I'm sure you and other of our MPs will be at that. And we had the pre-meet earlier this week. So the constituent authorities of the Great Southwest remain their independent bodies, if that's the right word to use, and we're coming together with some shared asks of government, but recognise that we may have other asks individually. So if, for example, around renewables and the green economy, the asks here mirror those of the Great Southwest, fantastic, and we can have that wider coming together and stronger lobbying. But if unfortunately they don't, or if we have other asks outside of the Great Southwest, then we'll be putting those forward ourselves. So hopefully, Steve, that helps to give you an answer to that question.
Yeah, it's fine. I just wanted to make sure that was being considered, because we didn't want sort of competing proposals being put forward. But yeah, happy with your response. Good.
Absolutely, thank you, Steve. So Kate, if you'd like to come in next, please.
Thank you very much. I think this is a really important opportunity for us to set out our kind of bold strategy for Cornwall as we come out the other side of coronavirus and link in our thoughts into the forthcoming white paper on devolution and economic recovery. And in working through this, we've had some very useful discussions with Becky Miles, who is the new area director covering the Southwest and the West Midlands, who is committed to working with us in building Cornwall's plans. And in my dialogue with her last week, she was making clear that the government is interested in devolution at all levels to the local level, reflecting our ambitions that we've had for double devolution in Cornwall, to places such as Cornwall, and then across to more regional groupings in order to do some of that work, particularly around trade and investment. So I think that by being clear about what we think is right for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, we can, through this leadership board, then be able to engage in, do we think this is devolution at a much more local level than even Cornwall, or are there some things that make sense for us to be working across with colleagues on? So I think our partnership with the Great Southwest is an evolving and an important one. And when we see that devolution white paper, I think that we'll be in a good place if we've done some of this thinking as set out in the paper to really engage with that and make sure that we localise as much decision making as we can in Cornwall so that we can join up services in the best interests of our residents. Thank you.
Absolutely. Councillor Taylor next, please.
Thank you, Leader. I think you might be aware that this particular item has generated quite a lot of interest outside of this forum. So what I would like to ask, please, in relation to, it is a really important opportunity. I totally agree with what Kate has said. But in relation to our partnership and working together, for elected members, where do you see them fitting in to the decisions and the scrutiny and the participation that feed in to the ideas that will be coming out from this Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Leadership Board?
Thank you. I wasn't aware that it attracted interest elsewhere, but I'm glad that people are looking at the meeting. Hopefully they're viewing and understanding more as well. So I think we touched on this earlier in terms of the constituent partners of the Leadership Board need to agree within their organisations before being able to get that collective agreement. So I think that's the safeguard. I'm not sure, Councillor Taylor, if you were at the all-member briefing on the economy before this meeting, but certainly some of the issues that we're discussing now in terms of what we'd like to see for the future were discussed at that meeting. So in terms of Cornwall Council, there'll be a number of fora where we'll be discussing this. Indeed, some of those thoughts were at Cabinet just on Wednesday. As I said, the all-member briefing, no doubt scrutiny, we'll be looking at various aspects as well. And after I've brought in Chris Long next, I'll go to Councillor Francis, who might like to talk about discussions on the Isles of Scilly. Does that answer your question, Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you. And I wasn't at the members' briefing because, unfortunately, like our life, I was on another conference call. But I am lucky because I do sit on the board and I do represent 46 Conservative members. But, you know, we are aware that there are other groups within Cornwall that don't have that representation. So it's making sure then that their voice is also heard, along with 123 elected Cornwall councillors. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Chris, next, please.
Thank you, Julian. It's just to inform members that health and care reporting to the monitoring board will focus on the devolution asks being developed, and they're pretty much aligned with what we want. But it's just to remind members that there's a national mandate now in place for all systems to become integrated care systems by April of next year. So we're also operating to another timeline and pressure to have this integrated care system up and running in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly by April of next year. So it's another pressure on us to make sure that we're aligned, but also a separate timeline that we're having to work to as well.
Thank you very much, Chris. Councillor Francis, would you like to give a view from the Isles of Scilly?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I very much appreciated the in-depth working that we've been doing together with Cornwall through this leadership board all through the crisis. As you know, we are our own independent unitary authority on Scilly, but very much welcome this paper. Welcome the collaborations that we already have with Cornwall. which are hugely helpful, I hope, to both authorities. But I know that you're going to come over when you can, or if you can't, we're virtually going to meet you and some of your officers shortly to discuss with our members ways of collaboration in the future. And yeah, absolutely welcome discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Francis. Alison next, please.
Yeah, I suppose it's important that I speak because I didn't mention it in my update actually, Julian, and I think the stronger together we are absolutely, and I think the example of that has been through this crisis where we have all worked together from our MPs, with the ministers, with the council. I think it's been a really fantastic example, actually, that if we work together as a team, there's a real opportunity for Cornwall's ambition, our community's ambition, to be achieved. And I mean, I don't mean to be controversial, but maybe it is time to think about an elected mayor for Cornwall, because just in terms of the devolution opportunities that I see as a police and crime commissioner with the big, large metropolitan mayors, and I would see Cornwall as the big, large metropolitan opportunity, the justice opportunities that they're doing around youth justice, and some of those opportunities, I want to work with you to get some of that devolution. And I just thought I'd be a little bit controversial and bring that old chestnut back up.
Thank you very much, Alison. Elected mayors have their own PCCs, don't they?
They do have deputies, and you know there are ways and means of working around this. I think I've got a solution. Excellent,
very good. I think what we're saying is let's agree on what's important for Cornwall, or Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and then we'll have that discussion with government. We've got a form of governance that we believe is working well. But if there are stipulations around governance from government, then we'll need to have that conversation and see what we think is more important. Hopefully, when we get that far along the line of the conversation with government. I haven't got any more hands raised at the moment. Councillors Price and Grottick, who haven't got their hand up function, would either of you like to come in?
No, I'm fine at the moment.
Thank you, Helen. And Fran?
I'd just like to say it's a very interesting paper. We enjoy collaborating with Cornwall, and we look forward to further discussions to see what areas we might like to take forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So no one else has indicated. I'm afraid there's a dog barking in the background, so my apologies for that if you can hear it. But I'll read out the recommendations and then we'll move to the vote. So the recommendations that the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Leadership Board formally endorses the approach set out in the report, and in further detail at Annex B, for developing a shared vision for the Cornwall we want to inform their recovery and renewal plans, and building a strong Yes for Cornwall case for devolution of the powers and funding needed to deliver those plans. That the Chair of the Council of the Isles of Scilly be invited to give consideration in discussion with the wider council membership to the merits of including the island's ambitions for the future within our shared renewal vision and devolution case, while respecting their independence and autonomy. So can I have someone put their hand up to propose? Chris Long has, thank you. And someone to second, please. Who's that? Councillor Rothschild, thank you. So we've got a proposer and seconder. So Democratic Service Officer, if we could take the vote, please.
Yes, so all those voting for the recommendations, please raise your hand now. Okay, Chairman, that's carried. Councillor Painter was on hold, but do we have any abstentions, please? no abstentions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. So I'm just putting my hand down, which probably doesn't matter too much at this point in the meeting. The date of the next meeting is the next item on the agenda, which at the moment is down for the 18th of September. So we'll keep that as the date, but it may be that events overtake us and we want to have a formal meeting sooner than that. So we'll bear that in mind, colleagues. But that's the end of the meeting. So I'd like to thank everyone for your participation, involvement, wise words, and as we've been talking about, all of the fantastic work from our organisations and from all of those that we represent across Scilly and the Isles of Scilly. So thank you very much, everyone. I declare the meeting closed.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye, Julian. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Julian. Bye-bye.